Hey, I'm Vigil. This is my stream journal. The date is 7/15/2022. The time is 20:52. Um, I'm not a politician um, or a prophet or a seer. I was being sarcastic today on Twitter, by the way, because I was all upset. Um, I wrote this though because I just realized. I realized for a while how close we are to the edge. I've realized it for 10 years. I've been thinking about it and writing about it since I was like fucking 17. Um, I want to read this. It's not complete. I don't know if I'll finish writing it. But we are going insane as a species and as a community, as a civilization. We are literally on the doorstep of like nuclear war, and we're on the doorstep of global collapse of our economy, and the doorstep of climate shift or change or whatever you want to call it, the death of our species, the filtering point that civilizations hit to destroy them, um, and no one's really doing anything about it. Like we're all pushing it further to the edge. Like when we begin talking about nuclear war as if it's nothing, or we begin seeing that the famine is about to occur, and it's not going to be like a short famine. It's going to be a famine that just grows worse and worse unless we begin building food for it, or food supply stocks for it. And like the economy isn't going to just rapidly heal itself. It's insane. And like, so I wrote this, and I explain components of why I understand I'm not the right person to write it, but the reality is that we're entering the precipice of a third world war, which would be nuclear, a global climate shift that will force billions to migrate that is combining with diminishing food supplies, and the singularity which is already beginning in the various global labs around the world. These adversities are not something which our species cannot overcome, but it is what it is. These adversities are not something which our species cannot overcome, but it is what is known as the filtering point for our species in this specific civilization. If we were able to prevent nuclear war, make rapid adjustments to accommodate the climate shift, and correctly engineer and guide the singularity, our species will begin entering the stars and will become a multiple planet species. I just skipped down a whole bunch. The doomsday mentality that our nations and populations have adopted is something that has become contagious and is degrading our very minds. We're becoming mentally ill as a community, like the Nazis were in the 1940s. We should not be naive, but we should also not fall into self-fulfilling prophecies. It is always our choice what we do. I write this with understanding that I'm not the best person to write this based on my recent writings over the last 5 years. There's reasons that I will not get into simply to avoid them being labeled as excuses. Either you know what has been happening or you don't. There are ways that we can survive and fulfill the potential of our humanity, both as individuals and as a community, a collective community of species. These pathways away from or around or even through with a sound mind for reason and heart of ethics, the various problems that we will be facing today in a year and over the next 10 to 50 years, exist. Today there are people starving around the globe as there have been for generations, but this famine will be far worse and will have impacts over generations. It will destabilize the entire global community and will lead to regional and global violence. The rising temperature levels have been linked to the rising carbon levels that are a result of our use of fossil fuels. We realistically, though, cannot retool our entire industries and transportation systems fast enough to stop the threshold where it becomes unreversible and self-propagating due to the gases stored in the icebergs and the burning forest. We're likely to see the sixth extinction event within the next 100 years, likely within decades or a decade, and there's a probability that we lose the ocean at some point, which will destabilize the entire planet. The religious, ideological, regional, and ego power disputes between our nations is a major existential threat to our entire species, as is a forced global government brought on by transnational corporations, brought by the neoliberals, neocons with guns and forced regime change, or global communists or religious fundamentalism. Water shortages are going to begin occurring as the temperatures rise. They already are occurring, and climate shift begins shifting, causing our food-bearing lands to become desolate, and extreme weather is going to grow worse. Death zones where it is too hot to live, nor is there any water supplies, are going to start popping up in various portions of the world. This is the beginning of the hurdles we must overcome to prevent the collapse of our civilization and the death of our species. These are all going to compound exponentially with the time windows we have to prepare or counter them closing rapidly. To prepare for famine, we must begin creating closed ecosystem farms and begin stockpiling massive amounts of food. To prepare for water shortages, we must begin building desalination plants globally. To counter the effects of global warming, which is past the window of stopping, we must begin large-scale projects to terraform the planet while we still are using fossil fuels. We must begin the diffusion or the spreading around of the singularity to ensure that everyone in the entire planet has access to the technology that is being created so nobody's left behind as our species begins to augment itself. We must actively work to create a global economic system that is fair trade instead of free trade, where we work with diplomacy to prevent the destruction of our civilization. Nobody wins a nuclear war, and as long as the nuclear weapons exist, we are nearing the reality of it occurring simply because of the statistics. We must actively begin talking and working with the communities around the globe, creating underground networks of communication that allow the back channels to remain open to stave off the destruction that seems imminent. The global economic system is failing completely. It is predictable, and we have options on how we respond to it. We can simply reboot the system if we agree as an entire community of nations to simply choose it to, or we can begin a slow, methodical walk back from the brink of destruction that our global economic system is facing. It is better to lose 20% of your money than for the entire currency system to collapse. It is better that we all live in poverty for a decade as we work to rebuild our savings and wealth instead of allowing destruction of the civilization. The collapse of the major economic systems and defaulting by the major nations collapses everyone because the system is global. We can begin making plans for the new economic system, which I believe in cell theory, which says it's not a single currency, it's not a single economic system. It's broken apart into independent, not interweaved communities of economics that are mostly local and regional and national and not quite global that often. As they did after, we can begin making plans for the new economic system as they did after World War II. We can begin a global Marshall Plan with every nation participating in it to counter the global poverty, famine, and preventable death while providing cheap education to the global population. These things are not insane and impossible for humanity if we work together. That's what I have written so far. If you could compile all of my collective writings over the past 20 years, you'll see that I have operational plans for everything, like literally everything that I've run into. I've contemplated it, and I've worked out an operational plan. Some of them are feasible, some of them may work, some of them may not. I hope it's a starting ground. If you can get access to my writings, remember that I have a remote control in me, and I have had it since I was little. Like it's a Neuralace, it's an electrode, and a drugging program and stuff. And make sure it's not edited writings or censored. But this is where we stand. We are literally on the edge of complete destruction of our civilization, and global war, global famine, global economic collapse, global civilization collapse, global energy market collapse. And we all are following leaderships that are already at the edge of death, that are going dementia, or mentally ill, or hardline communists, or hardline Republican, or hardline Democrats. Shit. This is the first video I'll make. I'll probably make another one once the writing's complete, if it's completed.